OJP's Assistant Attorney General, Karol Mason.
So Denise talked about my passion and energy, but I'm trying to keep up with her, and I'm going to tell a story that she doesn't know I'm going to tell. So the guy who runs our audiovisual at the Office of Justice Programs told me today, we had a seminar a couple weeks ago about how to protect ourselves in Chinatown. And one of the things I mentioned is I said, well, I'm often leaving work just before midnight. The lights go out at 10, as Denise knows, and she and I both have figured out a system where we have lamps and flashlights to continue working after 10, because my view is if I don't make it out by 10, I've already missed the window and I might as well just keep working. And midnight becomes the next window, but I'm trying to keep up with her. So anyway, Juan heard this and he thought, yeah, right. And one night, it was 2 days after the seminar, he was bringing keys back in and I was leaving just at midnight. He goes, you were serious. And he said, and then after I left, I ran into Denise on the street. He goes, the two of you really work like that? So I'm just trying to keep up with her. So in case you question our commitment, don't. But it's not just ours, and we have a huge responsibility to represent the work of not just OJP, but BJA in particular, and other people that you're here from. So will everybody from BJA and OJP please stand up? I just want you to see these folks. And let's give them a round of applause, because Denise will tell you that while we do work hard, these are the folks that do the really hard work. We come up with bright ideas and say, we'd like to see this, and Eugene knows and Amy know my favorite thing is somebody says something, it's like, okay, who's gonna volunteer to put that down on paper for us? So we've got just wonderful, wonderful people here. And we're lucky to have them committed to this issue. I also want to specially single out Amy Solomon, who is one of my special advisors. Amy, you're gonna see her later, but wave your hand. But she, you know, it's called the Attorney General's Reentry Council, but for those of you who know Amy know that she is really the brains, the brawn behind all of that work, and so please join me in thanking Amy for all of what she does. And she thinks because she saw the speech ahead of time, she knows what I'm going to say, so I don't always say what's written on the paper. And finally, I want to thank Mike Thompson and the folks from the Council of State Governments and their Justice Center, especially Leah Kane. Where's Leah? Is she here somewhere? Okay. Oh, there she goes. Thank you. She literally worked around the clock to make this happen, and she was not alone. And I was told that the gentleman who just introduced us, that he had hair before this conference was planned. He told me he's really only 29. But so I think you're hearing the constant theme that people are doing this work who are committed to this work, and we share your commitment to this work, and we're so grateful to have you. So I'm proud to work with so many of you who care so deeply about these issues and about the safety of our communities, because we all know that this issue is integrally tied to the safety of our communities. And I'm proud to work for an Attorney General who fully understands the value of reentry programs like the ones so many of you administer, and who sees the potential they have not only to change individual behavior and create opportunities for those returning from jails and prisons, but to improve public safety and the health of our communities. Reentry is one of the pillars of the Attorney General's Smart on Crime initiative, which he launched last August. Hopefully you've heard something about this, and I do a little call and response thing. How many of you know about the AG's Smart on Crime initiative? Really? Okay. All right, I encourage you to go look for his speech that he gave at the ABA last year. So the Attorney General is directing the department to focus its efforts on reducing recidivism and improving fairness by rethinking our approach to crime, concentrating our energy not only on enforcement, prosecution, and incarceration, but also on prevention, intervention, and reentry as well. He's already modified the department's charging policies to ensure that people convicted of certain low-level, nonviolent federal drug crimes will face appropriate sentences, and he's encouraged reform of sentencing practices at the federal level. By taking these steps, we hope to lower federal prison costs and expand investments in local evidence-based strategies, diversion alternatives, and reentry programming aimed at preventing and reducing crime and keeping returning prisoners crime-free. The message this sends about the importance of reentry is powerful. Think about it. The nation's chief law enforcement officer is telling us that the work you're doing is central to the safety and prosperity of America's communities. That's quite an endorsement, and it's a sincere endorsement. And it's quite a responsibility as well. What the Attorney General is saying is that we're counting on all of you in this room to prove that his belief and his faith in reentry is real and will pay off in dividends in safer communities. The stakes are high, there's no question. That point was brought home 2 weeks ago by a landmark study produced by the National Research Council. This report was jointly funded by our National Institute of Justice and the MacArthur Foundation to examine incarceration rates over the last 4 decades. And it gives scientific affirmation to what many of us know through our own experience, that rates of incarceration in the United States are disproportionately high compared to the rest of the world. That's the cost of locking away so many people for so long, far outweigh the benefits, and that incarceration has a disparate racial impact and an especially destructive effect on already disadvantaged communities. The central recommendation of the report is that the U.S. should take steps to reduce incarceration, but it also underscores the critical need for effective reentry programs. It documents the low wages and high unemployment rates of those leaving prison, and it shows the connection to family instability and adverse developmental outcomes for millions of children who are touched by this issue. And I'm sure you're going to hear Eugene talk more about fatherhood initiatives and what we can do with children of incarcerated parents. It highlights something else most of us know as well, that large shares of prisoners come from and return to a relatively small number of distressed communities. In these communities, incarceration is not an unusual occurrence. Unfortunately, it's a commonplace experience, especially for young men of color. The jury is in. You know, we often use the phrase, the jury is out. Well, in this particular case, the jury is in. The cost of incarceration, both economic and societal, are substantial. But why exactly is reentry so critical to addressing this problem? And I think you know the answer, but we'll make sure. Well, for one thing, we know that recidivism rates among returning prisoners are high. Our Bureau of Justice Statistics confirmed this in a report released just last month, a couple of weeks ago. Nationally, 2 out of every 3 released prisoners are arrested for a new offense within 3 years, and about half will be reincarcerated. But it's important to note that 2 things about that study. One, these statistics cover a period from 2005 to 2010. So many of the gains achieved through the work you're doing through the Second Chance Act investments are not yet reflected in the report. In fact, you could call this study a baseline study or a starting point against which to measure the progress we're all making together under the Second Chance Act. Secondly, there are in fact states and communities that have already experienced reductions in recidivism. In 2012, the National Reentry Resource Center released a policy brief highlighting 7 states that reported significant declines in their 3-year recidivism rates. And a number of local programs specifically supported under the Second Chance Act are making a measurable difference, like the Harlem Parole Reentry Court, which has realized reductions in both unemployment and reincarceration, Project Reconnect in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where only 4 of the 181 participants who had been in the community for at least 12 months have recidivated. And you notice the theme here? It doesn't matter where these communities are located. What the theme is it's the work and the commitment from people like you all to our Second Chance Act programs. So even though we're all waiting for comprehensive data on the Second Chance Act achievements, we've already been seeing signs of progress. And it's important that we continue measuring the impact of reentry because as federal, state, and local resources continue to be strained, we'll need to be able to demonstrate both qualitative and quantitative successes. Otherwise, we risk losing the critical momentum that we've gained. We can't simply take for granted that all policymakers understand the value and potential of reentry the way we do, but fortunately we know that we do have leaders in the Senate who understand how important this issue is, as represented in the videos we saw just a few moments ago. That's why it's so critical that you continue to gather data about what's happening in your jurisdictions and that we become sophisticated about using risk levels to measure recidivism. We need this information so that we can understand if our programs are having their intended impact. It's also important that we at OJP support you through our own data collection efforts and by helping you apply the latest evidence. So in addition to supporting adult and juvenile reentry programs across the country, we're doubling down on our reentry research. Our National Institute of Justice is supporting several evaluations of Second Chance Act programs to measure both their impact and their cost effectiveness. You'll hear about some of the interim results on Friday, Friday. But I want to point out that there is one important finding thus far about second chance programs, meaning your programs. You're helping to change attitudes in your agencies about the importance of reentry, and that's something we can all be proud of and take credit for right now. Our Bureau of Justice Statistics is also working to capture recidivism outcomes in future studies. And BJA, through the National Reentry Resource Center, continues to help states devise evidence-based strategies to reduce recidivism and assess their progress. And you'll hear that constant theme about evidence-based, because we need to find out what works, and when we know what works, then we can replicate it and really have broader impact across the country. We're also tackling specific issues related to reentry in an effort to understand what works to build skills and connect returning individuals to jobs, treatment, housing, and other services. One of our areas of greatest focus is employment. You'll hear more about this from Amy and her colleagues in a few moments, but we know that finding a stable job is one of the best ways to keep a returning prisoner crime-free. Yet prisoners continue to encounter frequent roadblocks to employment. In fact, about half of the collateral consequences of incarceration are related to employment barriers. The Reentry Council is doing a great deal of work in this area, and I love the work they're doing because whenever I meet people and they say, tell me what barriers are and what's not happening, I go, that's not true. Because the Reentry Council has spent a number of years working on these collateral consequences, and I send them often to Amy with I know her number by heart, but I won't give it to you right now. But I send them to Amy so that we can dispel the myths, because the biggest challenge is letting people know that we're tackling these issues and what they can do. So, as I mentioned, the Reentry Council is doing great work in this area, making sure we're doing our part on the federal level to change policies that prevent people with criminal records from getting jobs and becoming productive, law-abiding citizens. And NIJ is supporting a national inventory of collateral consequences to shine a light on these hidden penalties of incarceration, from employment prohibitions to the curtailment of voting rights. The American Bar Association is finishing a database of the thousands of sanctions and restrictions in place across the country. Our hope is that judges, prosecutors, and defense counsel will be able to use this information to make decisions that take into account the full extent of the penalties assessed against people who are convicted in our systems. We also hope that legislators and policymakers will use the database to reassess the laws and regulations already in place. The Attorney General has encouraged state attorneys general to re-examine laws in their jurisdictions. And as part of the Attorney General's Smart on Crime initiative, the Attorney General directed all Department of Justice components to take collateral consequences into account when proposing any new regulations or guidance. And we're continuing research in other areas. NIJ's landmark redemption study provided critical evidence showing that individuals who remain crime-free for a certain period of time are no more likely to commit offenses than others. Needless to say, this is important information for employers who are considering hiring individuals with an arrest or criminal record, and for employers who may seek to exclude them from hiring consideration. BJA has also supported a RAND study of the value of correctional education that found education programs for incarcerated adults and juveniles have been shown to reduce post-release recidivism and to be cost-effective. These findings support the notion that reentry planning is essential to public safety and that it must begin early, in fact, as soon as an individual comes into the system. Evidence like this will be critical as we continue to build our case for effective reentry. NIJ has devoted some $14 million to reentry-related research and evaluations. BJA and our Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention have both made substantial investments in improving our understanding of reentry practices. And our Bureau of Justice Statistics is providing the data we need to determine the impact of our criminal and juvenile justice policies on crime and recidivism. We're fortunate to have leadership at the Department of Justice who are committed to building our base of knowledge about reentry and putting that knowledge into practice. Our Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, the Associate Attorney General all believe strongly in the importance of reentry research, policy, and programming. And if you haven't met him yet, I encourage you to make sure you have the opportunity to hear from Charles Samuels, the Director of the Bureau of Prisons. Charles is a huge supporter of reentry. He's an advocate proponent who believes that reentry begins the moment people enter the doors of his system. And we believe that what the programs he's putting in place are models we can all follow for how we prepare people to return to their communities. We also have leaders like Ron Davis, the head of the COPS office, who understands that reentry is a critical factor to safe communities in America. So when you have untraditional advocates supporting reentry, how can we do anything but succeed? So I know I speak on behalf of all of these folks when I say that we are grateful for everything that you do. You are doing noble work to change minds and hearts, and you are helping to ensure a better world, not just for those returning from jail and prison, but for those neighborhoods and families they return to. So thank you very much for all the work you do.